Well, it's publics, plural, because we work across the entire university, so it depends on the research group and what their particular engagement process and needs is. So as the Public Engagement and Research Unit, we're about facilitating various platforms and strategies so that many, many researchers can connect with many, many different audiences appropriate to their context. And we do run big programs, so we run the Science Festival and we run Human Worlds Festival, and we tour with our roadshow, so we do have some sense of where we want an audience to be. But we're particularly interested in the roadshow, for instance, in meeting a very broad range of people and allowing our researchers to encounter a broad range of people. So we deliberately target events where there are lots of people of different types at different times of the year.
So the widening participation and recruitment teams primarily work with young people from primary school age right up to sixth form or college age students, and we mostly build those relationships through schools.
So I think for me it's a mixture. So we've got teenagers and adults and even the older generation for different projects. In the older generation, we're doing things like science cafes, just to re-engage them with the science that they probably haven't engaged with for a very long time. We're talking like 10, 20, 30 years. With the younger years, we're looking more at schools and inspiring them about the science that I do in my department and the rest of the university, and giving them idea and food for thought about the careers that are available after university and getting them to think about university as an option, which they may not have. And then there's that gap in between, so we're looking at like 23 to 40-year-olds, that sort of gap, and that's where things like Bright Club, which is a comedy club for researchers, we get these researchers to perform stand-up comedy, talking about the work that they do and engaging the public with their research through and doing it in a way where the audience doesn't realise they're learning something.
So my audience depends on the research project I'm working on, but for this video I'm going to talk about my work with patients.
So when we engage with researchers, we talk to them about your research says X, but so what? And uncovering what that so what leads to will give us an idea of the policy area that needs to be influenced, and from there we can look at who the policymakers are that will have the levers at their disposal. So having identified who the decision maker is, we then work with different stakeholders to be able to influence that decision maker. So maybe that's working with Royal Colleges, maybe that's working with patient participation groups, maybe that's working with NGOs, maybe that's working with World Health Organization. So the audience varies on the subject matter.
Well, we're one of 10 Russell Group universities within what's called the Catalyst Seed Fund programme, and that's a legacy from the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, and what was RCUK is now UKRI. There's a strategic drive across the sector to improve the way that universities engage with public audiences, basically to do better research in the long term, to have a more engaged research strategy. We're part of that, so that's everything we do is aimed about changing the landscape for our researchers and the way the university as a whole interacts with those various public audiences.
So primarily we need to try and make sure that these students are making informed choices about university and about higher education, whether that be thinking about further study, careers, that kind of thing, whether it's sparking some interest in a subject area they might have some previous knowledge of, or whether it's giving them an idea of research that they have no idea about, and we want to tell them more about it.
With school children, especially in those sort of deprived areas where there might not be a lot of funding or opportunities to go out and do all the extra stuff that other schools do that have better equipment and facilities, you want to go out to those schools to let them know that there are these other options at university, there are all these things that they can do, because they're not given that information normally. They don't have that supplement to their syllabus. So for that reason, what we're trying to do there is we're trying to stimulate them and give them that extra stuff that everyone else gets, but they might not be able to. So it's sort of like widening participation, reaching those underrepresented groups. Whereas when we do stuff like Bright Club, the comedy club, we're just trying to get the public interested in work, trying to connect this public community with the research community. You know, there's this big void between the two. They think that we're just using up taxpayers' money, and they're not really sure what we're doing. And because we're paid by taxpayers' money, we should feel obliged to let them know where their money's going.
So the purpose of engaging with them is to get their input into the research that we're working on. So by working with the patients, we can make sure that our research is relevant to the patient population, but also that it's appropriately designed for them. Otherwise, what is the point in doing the research? It has additional benefits too. It can improve public perception of research, which means they're much more likely to take part in studies or trials later on and tell their friends and family to do the same.
So fundamentally, the policy-making process is messy. Decision makers need to weigh competing factors. Who are the winners? Who are the losers? What's the time to be able to deliver this programme? What are the existing interventions that are out there already in the field? We're under no illusion that decision makers will solely rely on the information provided by researchers, but there's a role for the academy to play to be able to inform policymakers and provide them with the best insight possible to make those decisions.
Again, because we're across the entire university, I mean, that really depends on the project, but I can talk about the roadshow, where we're touring with 10 or 12 research groups, interacting in different places. One of the common themes is, because we turn up at places where you're not necessarily going to expect university interaction research, so for instance BBC Countryfile Live, which we've just been to, definitely there's an audience surprise at finding us, and it's only through the encounter with the interactive activities that we have that people get past that and think, oh, that's fascinating, and then they have the longer conversation. But you're right to say there's often a barrier in perception of what the university might be offering or what a researcher might be doing, and so a lot of the work we do is trying to find mechanisms that minimise those barriers.
So they want to be engaged, they want to learn more and be curious and find out about their kind of next steps and things that they want to do in the future. In terms of research, they might not necessarily know very much at all about kind of the research that goes on in Russell Group universities, here at Southampton, and just research generally, especially if there's little background of them knowing anyone who's gone to university, and even their parents and teachers might not know what the wide range of research is that goes on and the impact it has in everyday life.
So with schools, if you say you're a scientist, they think you should be wearing a lab coat, making explosions in a laboratory, something like that. And so what I do is actually the other issue is that if you go to a class and you say, what does a scientist do? Their first reaction will be, he does this, he. So what we try and do is go out there, clear that misconception that only men do science, to show that actually, whatever background you're from, as long as you're interested, you can do science. Science is for everyone. We're also trying to get rid of that whole lab coat making explosions thing. So what I do is I show the sort of breadth of applications in acoustics and show them that actually you could be out at sea, you know, whether you're measuring bubble populations from waves for climate change, or monitoring whales and dolphins to understand how they live and communicate and breed and feed, or we could be using these equipments that we've invented here at the university to clean utensils in a hospital, or clean wounds, or clean, the food that we eat. There's a whole diverse application of acoustics, just acoustics. So what we try and do is show that, even just with sound and vibration, you can do so much, not just making explosions in a lab. With the public, again, we're just trying to bridge this gap between the research community and the public, letting them know that their tax money is going towards things that are really useful and that apply to them. So quite often we get these researchers to think of the bigger picture. They're doing this really specific work. We need to remind them to tell the public of the bigger picture, where that little work goes towards, whether it's making planes quieter, finding some solutions to structural inadequacies, or cancer research, or helping fish swim through a lake without being sucked into power plant, air water intakes, things like that. So just trying to let the public know that there's something interesting.
For children, they often think that research means more needles or scary hospital procedures. Despite this, many of the children I work with have long-term conditions, and they want to be able to improve the health of future children, and so they're kind of willing to work with us. They get to develop as individuals from it. They get things for their CVs, their personal statements, and they quite like the voucher that they get as a thank you as well. For adults, it's a little bit different to children. So they often don't really know research is happening here in the hospital, and they don't really know what research is about either. They often kind of want to give back to the NHS, or it can give them a sense of purpose to help them deal with coming to terms with like their illness or their family member's illness.
Okay, so in terms of values and characteristics, I suppose the consistent factor is that policymakers are time poor and problem rich. So when engaging with policymakers, we're looking to be able to address today's problems that in a way which is cheap, popular and easy to implement, and maybe we'll have a look at tomorrow afternoon's problems as well. But fundamentally we're looking at what is the issue for the policymakers today. A huge amount of the work that we do as a unit is talking to researchers to help them navigate that difference between the policy process and the academic cycle, and being able to address some fundamental issues there. So primarily pace. Decision makers are looking to be able to know what's important and why it's important immediately. So don't use a page of text when a paragraph will do, don't use a paragraph when a sentence will do, even down to, do you need to use a sentence, can you not represent that in some numbers or an infographic or some other clear way of being able to get your message across. The other side of things to consider, but still focused on time, is that trust is incredibly important to policymakers. And this is where it's quite hard for researchers, and particularly early career researchers, to be able to dedicate the correct or understand the right amount of time to be able to dedicate to building those personal networks. So Professor Matt Flinders over at University of Sheffield's Crick Centre recently summed this up into a nice analogy. So the great problem with sowing seeds in a political context is that you can never be absolutely sure that they'll germinate. And even when the seeds take root and grow, the messiness of politics will inevitably make it hard to prove an unequivocal link between your research and what happens. So fundamentally there, your time is constrained as an early career researcher, but in order to have the greatest impact, you need to be building a relationship with the decision makers of tomorrow, and who those will be is very unclear. So we like to think about small time and big time. Small time, why your work is relevant in the shortest possible space, and big time, how you grow those relationships strategically over the life of your career.
I suppose, I mean, in two ways. There is a very good learning across the sector in how to engage audiences. So, and part of what we do is trying to promote that across the entire university. But also it's experience. It's knowing that, for instance, what works at the Science Festival, what works on the roadshow. So what will actually bring people in. If you think about, if you imagine you're going to an event, why would you go to the university stand? There has to be something that draws you in. So we've built up over the years some very good sort of curiosity magnets that bring people in, get people over that initial barrier. So I suppose we've thought about it quite a long time. We do it quite well on the roadshow, and we're recognised for that. We get invited to other events because we do it so well. But within the context of the sector, it's about spreading best practice.
So we try and build relationships with schools because they have so much to fit into the academic year, that the planning process and the scheduling process and the delivery has to be a two-way process. So really thinking about their needs and what we want to try and deliver. In terms of delivery, we try and make our sessions as hands-on and practical as we can, so that students really get to engage and learn wider skills like teamwork and kind of careers planning and things like that.
One of the key things is just to keep it simple, get rid of jargon, engage your audience, let them know that what you're doing relates to their life directly, and letting them know that we are humans too, letting them know researchers are humans too. Those are sort of key things. And The way I feel like I'm achieving this now successfully is the fact that, you know, with our comedy club, we're getting an average of 60 people turn up to shows. So we know we're getting lots of people, and a lot of those people that I see have come to the previous show. We're getting this repeated business, and so that shows we're making a good impact.
So I have to think firstly about the audience I'm trying to reach before I can properly plan the activity. And once I've identified who that is and what their values and their preconceptions are about health research, I can then try and plan an activity that will be kind of appropriate and will reach them. Once I've planned kind of that, I also have to think about what activity will work for them. So retired people like to meet in the daytime. Children need to meet outside of school, but then they're going to be missing kind of their sports or their orchestra, whatever it is they like to do. And then people who have families and are also working full-time have really minimal free time to actually come and meet somebody face-to-face. So I have to think about kind of innovative ways that I can still get their opinions without actually having to bring them in for a meeting.
Well, again, because we work across so many different sectors in the university, those answers to those questions are quite specific to areas. But what I would say is that there is an enormous demand from young researchers to have an infrastructure that supports engaged research. So the sector is changing, researchers are changing, and the nature of that interaction with the audience is changing. And we need to be ready for that, to facilitate it. And if we do that well, what's going to happen is that down the line, you know, those researchers will be doing fantastic engaged research with a large number of different publics, and the whole landscape will be different in a few years' time.
So working with schools is incredibly rewarding. We get to hopefully supplement the syllabuses or the advice and information programs that they run within schools. And personally, we get to see that spark of interest when a student understands a new concept or is shown something new that they wouldn't have known anything about. In terms of the wider university, the widening participation work that we do really helps to bring together a community of students that are from a really wide range of backgrounds, which is fantastic.
It's a big confidence booster. When I first started my PhD, you know, I was feeling a bit low, a bit out of my depth. Once I started presenting my work, talking to the public about what I do, even just talking to other researchers in the university and engaging them with our work, you could see that actually, to the lay person, to someone who's not in your field, what you do is pretty impressive. And you see the public are really interested in it too. You know, for stuff that I do, it's quite easy because I talk about whales and dolphins and bubbles and cancer research and all this other crazy stuff. So actually, it's quite easy to sort of G up the audience. But the first thing I think, it's a bit of a selfish one, but it's a confidence boost. And I think that it's good for the research community to go out there and engage with the public because it's a confidence boost for them as well. The second thing is that the public, they just don't, you know, they don't know what's going on around all these buildings and things. So it's really good to get out there, let them know, because then they come back, and sometimes they come back with really good discussions. So we get this citizen science happening in various departments and different projects, and that's really useful. So if you engage the public with the work that you do, and then they come back and ask questions, they could spark something really interesting for your own research. So I think it's worth involving them. It's great to inspire a younger generation to come and do the things that we do for the future. So we're continually pushing the boundaries. But it's good for the public as well because they're learning something without realizing it. They're enjoying themselves. Some of these people haven't engaged with the work that we do for a long time. You know, they would have done it at school and they're not done it since. And there's this feedback system again. You know, like we give something, they give back something else. You know, that you never would have expected had you not done it.
So for me, I just really enjoyed doing it. I love talking to new people and seeing how the kind of their input into research really changes how research is carried out. It's also really helped me develop my confidence and my communication skills. For the university and the department, the healthcare researchers, it's actually a stakeholder requirement that we're working and talking to the patient community and allowing them to influence our research. So it meets that criteria. But more importantly, it makes sure that the research is appropriately designed, that we're actually answering a question that the patients need answering, and has the greatest benefit to the patient population. for the people who take part, the patients and the public that volunteer their time for us, it can often give them a sense of purpose. It allows them to give back. It can stimulate their interest in the topic. There's a whole kind of wealth of reasons, and it kind of varies depending on the individual.
Okay, so let's start with me. So the work that I do is incredibly intellectually stimulating. I work with researchers from all faculties, and we're really in a key position to be able to deliver the university's core mission of changing the world for the better. We take the groundbreaking research which is conducted here by researchers from across the world to be able to deliver better policy insight for local communities, national communities and an international audience. At an institutional level, clearly there's the ever-present Research Excellence Framework, and there's evidence generated, captured and change delivered by the work of my team in engaging with researchers across the university. And for the policymakers, I think we make it easy for them to be able to engage with people at the top of their field, to be able to provide them with the insight which is required for them to make the best policy.